In 1913, Frank Woolworth walked into his own vault, counted out $13.5 million in cash, and paid for a tower so lavish it needed 51,000 hand-carved terracotta pieces. No investors, no debt, just pure ego in stone. Today, billionaires build for profit, not legacy, filling skylines with glass boxes designed to be sold and demolished within decades. What forced the world's wealthiest men to abandon monuments like the Woolworth Building for disposable towers nobody loves, and why can't anyone build beauty like this ever again? Frank Woolworth ran his five-and-dime empire with relentless thrift. But when it came to his skyscraper, he opened the vault. Over the course of 3 years, he quietly amassed parcels at Broadway and Barclay, paying in full and never revealing his hand to speculators or rivals. By the time ground broke in 1910, every dollar for the land and construction, $13.5 million, a sum that would approach $400 million today, came directly from Woolworth's personal accounts and the dividends of his retail chain. No bankers, no outside investors, no construction loans. The project stood apart in a city where even the grandest towers usually rose on borrowed money and complex syndicates. Woolworth's ledgers, preserved in the archives of the New York Historical Society, show a stream of direct payments: steel from the foundry, marble from the quarry, terracotta from Atlantic Terracotta Company. He demanded discounts for cash up front, securing materials and labor without the delays or compromises that came with financing. Contractors and suppliers used to waiting months for payment found themselves paid on delivery. In a single transaction, Woolworth wired $1.6 million for steel, an amount that would have staggered most developers. The press marveled at the spectacle. The Wall Street Journal called the building the greatest cash purchase in the history of American real estate. No mortgage meant no interest clock ticking, no lenders scrutinizing every line item, no quarterly reports to soothe nervous partners. Architect Cass Gilbert was granted rare freedom to pursue a vision of Gothic grandeur, drawing inspiration from the Houses of Parliament and the cathedrals of Europe. Woolworth's only direction was make it beautiful, make it last. The result was a tower sheathed in nearly 400,000 pieces of hand-finished terracotta, each one modeled, glazed, and set by skilled artisans. Gargoyles, tracery, pinnacles, every flourish a testament to a client who could afford to indulge his taste for spectacle. Yet the building was never just a vanity project. Woolworth insisted that every rentable square foot be leased before opening day. He negotiated a 25-year anchor lease with Irving National Bank, and by April 1913, the tower's offices were fully let. The Cathedral of Commerce was both monument and machine, designed to outlast its rivals and to generate steady income for decades. But the lavish detail, the marble lobby, the mosaic vaults, the carved caricatures of Woolworth and Gilbert was possible only because the owner answered to no one but himself. In a city where most skyscrapers were built on credit, every design decision in the Woolworth building radiated from a single fact: the money was already in the bank. There was no need to cut corners or chase quick returns. The tower's grandeur, its permanence, and its unapologetic ornament were all paid for in advance. Brick by brick, check by check. This was the last moment when a single fortune could buy not just a skyline, but a legacy in stone. Cass Gilbert's vision for the Woolworth building demanded more than steel and glass. He called for a skin of glazed terracotta, a material that could capture the drama of Gothic cathedrals while standing up to New York's weather. For this, Gilbert turned to the Atlantic Terracotta Company, whose kilns in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, became the engine behind the tower's ornate shell. The scale of the project was staggering. Atlantic Terracotta received orders for about 7,500 tons, over 16 million pounds, of architectural terracotta, making it one of the largest single contracts in the company's history. The facade was divided into nearly 400,000 individual units, each one designed to fit a precise place on the building's frame. Shop drawings from Gilbert's office mapped out every panel, spandrel, and decorative block, assigning each a unique number. These drawings became blueprints for the factory floor, where teams of modelers, sculptors, and mold makers translated paper sketches into full-size clay forms. Unlike brick or stone, terracotta could be pressed into plaster molds, allowing for repetition without sacrificing detail. 8 main spandrel motifs varied across the facade, gave the building a sense of endless variety while keeping production efficient. Still, every gargoyle, crocketed pinnacle, and tracery band required the hands of a skilled artisan. The process began with clay blended and aged on site, pressed into molds, then carefully dried to prevent cracking. Once dry, each unit was dipped or brushed with a custom glaze, usually a light cream, but with subtle shifts in tone and the occasional flash of blue or green. These glazes, developed by in-house chemists, gave the Woolworth its signature shimmer, catching sunlight and rain in shifting patterns across the tower. Firing was a delicate operation. Kilns ran around the clock, each batch watched by experienced firemen who judged temperature by the color of the flames and the sound of the draft. Warped or cracked pieces were set aside, but most survived the ordeal, destined for careful packing and shipment by rail and barge to Manhattan. On site, masons and riggers worked floor by floor, fastening each terracotta block to the steel skeleton with iron straps and mortar. Where units did not fit, on-site carvers made adjustments by hand, blending industrial repetition with individual touch. The result was a facade that seemed to defy the city's relentless pace. Gargoyles leaned from cornices, their faces modeled after Woolworth, Gilbert, and even the foreman who oversaw the work. Delicate tracery and pointed arches wrapped the building from base to crown, echoing the great cathedrals of Europe. The light cream glaze, chosen to stand out against the city's soot and haze, gave the tower an ethereal glow at sunrise and dusk. This kind of ornament was possible only because the craftsman's labor was valued as a core asset. Atlantic Terracotta's workforce included generations of modelers, glazers, and kilnmen, many of them immigrants trained in European traditions. Their skills turned raw clay into architectural lace, and their pride in the work was matched only by the ambition of the project itself. The Woolworth building's terracotta skin was more than decoration. It was a testament to a moment when artistry and industry worked hand in hand, when a building's surface told a story of human effort and technical mastery. Each of the hundreds of thousands of pieces, numbered, shaped, fired, and set by hand, became part of a living monument to both commerce and craft. For a brief window, the artisan's touch was not a luxury, but a necessity, woven into the very fabric of the skyline. Shadows began to stretch across downtown streets as new towers pressed skyward, blocking out the sun for hours each day. In 1915, the Equitable Building rose 40 stories straight up from the sidewalk, its sheer walls casting a chill over Nassau Street that never lifted, even at noon. Office workers complained of dim, airless corridors. Shopkeepers watched their storefronts slip into permanent twilight. Editorials in the New York Times and The Sun described these blocks as canyons of perpetual shade, warning of the health risks and the psychological toll of living in a city where daylight itself could be bought and sold. Civic leagues and neighborhood associations took up the cause. The Fifth Avenue Association, the City Club, and the Municipal Art Society all called for action, arguing that the unchecked race for height was turning streets into tunnels. At public hearings, reformers read letters from residents who worried that children would grow up pale and stunted, never feeling the warmth of sunlight. One report from the Heights of Buildings Commission quoted a lower Manhattan merchant who said, "We are being buried alive by stone and steel." The backlash was not limited to the press or polite society. Testimony poured in from tenement dwellers and garment workers, who described the Equitable's shadow as a daily hardship. Gas lamps, burning at midday, windows thrown open for a breath of air that never came. Doctors and urban planners joined the chorus, linking lack of sunlight to tuberculosis and other diseases. The city's Board of Estimate received petitions with hundreds of signatures, demanding that new skyscrapers be set back from the street and shaped to let light reach the pavement below. Developers and property owners pushed back, claiming that any restrictions would stifle progress and devalue land. But the momentum was with the reformers. Editorial cartoons lampooned the Equitable as a giant tombstone, looming over a city in mourning for its lost sky. The phrase, "canyons of darkness," became shorthand for everything that felt wrong about the modern metropolis. Civic outrage crystallized into a movement, and within a year, the demand for regulation was impossible to ignore. The outcry set the stage for the city's first comprehensive zoning law, a formula that would forever change the shape of New York's skyline. But before the law there was the human cost, a city forced to reckon with the price of ambition, measured in hours of daylight lost, and the voices of those who refused to live in shadow. Engineers in New York faced a new kind of challenge in 1916. The city's first zoning law didn't just limit how tall a building could rise, it rewrote the geometry of every future tower. The rule was mathematical, not aesthetic. After a certain height, determined by the width of the street below, a building could only continue upward if it stepped back from the sidewalk, forming a series of receding terraces. This was the birth of the wedding cake skyline. The formula, written into the zoning resolution, was precise. On a street 60 feet wide, a building could rise straight up to 85 feet. Beyond that, each story had to be set back within an imaginary sky exposure plane, an angle calculated to ensure sunlight would still reach the pavement at noon. Architects pored over setback charts, plotting the maximum volume they could squeeze out of each lot. The law allowed one exception. A slender tower covering no more than 1/4 of the lot area could rise without further setbacks. This opened the door for spires and crowns, but only if the bulk of the building respected the new envelope. Original zoning diagrams from the Board of Estimate mapped these envelopes block by block. Engineers translated these lines into stepped profiles, each setback carefully measured to match the code. The result was a city of tiered towers, each one shaped by a balance of sunlight, street width, and lot coverage. A typical office building could only build straight up for a fraction of its height, and after that, the floors shrank, sometimes dramatically, as the structure climbed higher. The most profitable solution was to maximize the lower, bulkier floors for rentable space, then stack a narrow tower above, a strategy that would define New York's skyline for decades. Mathematics became the architect's first constraint. Every decorative flourish, every setback, had to fit inside the zoning envelope. Charts from the period show building footprints shrinking to as little as 25% of the lot at the tower's crown. The setback code didn't ban ornament, but it forced designers to rethink how and where it could be applied. The days of sheer Gothic walls, like those on the Woolworth building, were over. Now every square foot had to be justified, not just to clients, but to the city's new regulatory logic. Engineers and draftsmen spent long nights calculating angles, drawing cross-sections, and checking compliance against the city's setback charts. The law's intent was clear: to protect daylight, open up the streets, and prevent another Equitable building from plunging blocks into shadow. The result was a skyline shaped as much by mathematics and public health as by ambition or artistry. The setback code became the invisible hand guiding every new tower, a constraint that demanded both technical ingenuity and creative adaptation. Inside the Atlantic Terracotta Company's sprawling plant, the air was thick with the scent of wet clay and coal smoke. Modelers hunched over long workbenches, coaxing Gothic tracery and gargoyle faces from blocks of clay, guided by a maze of shop drawings. Each sketch, stamped with a unique number, mapped a single piece of the Woolworth building's skin. The factory floor buzzed with the rhythm of repetition and invention, hundreds of thousands of units, each destined for a precise spot on the rising tower. 8 repeating spandrel motifs, designed for mass production, were pressed into molds again and again, but no 2 days at the plant were identical. Modelers refined details by hand, adjusting for shrinkage and fit. Kiln operators, many of them second-generation craftsmen, judged the firing by the color of the flames and the whisper of escaping steam. The kilns ran day and night, each batch a gamble against warping or cracks. When the doors swung open, rows of cream-glazed blocks shimmered in the early light, ready for inspection. A single error, a glaze too thin, or a crack along a hidden seam meant starting over. Yet the scale dwarfed any single setback. Atlantic Terracotta delivered nearly 400,000 pieces for the Woolworth facade, weighing in at over 7,500 tons. Logistics rivaled any industrial operation of the era, crates loaded by hand, labeled by elevation and bay, shipped by rail and barge to Lower Manhattan, where masons waited to lift each unit into place. The process unfolded with almost military precision. At peak, the factory could produce and ship enough terracotta to keep the installation crews moving at more than a floor per week. For the workers, every shipment was a point of pride. Their signatures sometimes hid on the backs of blocks, a silent record of hands that shaped the city's most ambitious monument. In these boom years, the artisan's skill was not a luxury, but the engine of progress. The Woolworth building stood as proof that artistry could thrive at industrial scale. Each gargoyle and arch a small act of defiance against the idea that mass production must mean monotony. The plant's whistles marked the hours, but the legacy of its output was measured in stories, not shifts. In 1932, the gates at Atlantic Terracotta's Perth Amboy plant swung shut for the last time. The local paper, the Evening News, printed the headline above the fold: "Plant closes, hundreds out of work." For decades, this factory had been the beating heart of a small New Jersey city, its kilns firing day and night to supply the ornate skins for towers like the Woolworth building. Now, silence settled over the sprawling yard. The payroll, once thick with the names of modelers, mold makers, kilnmen, and glazers, many of them immigrants who had carried their trades across the Atlantic, dwindled to a handful of watchmen and caretakers. In the months leading up to the closure, rumors rippled through the workshops. Orders for architectural terracotta, once steady and abundant, had dried up almost overnight. The Great Depression had frozen new construction across the country. Downtown Manhattan's building boom was a memory. At Perth Amboy, the final shipments left the loading docks with little ceremony. The men who had shaped clay into gargoyles and tracery for the city's great towers gathered their tools and pay envelopes, uncertain where to turn next. The Evening News quoted a foreman, "There is no more work for us. The city will feel this. Every family." Some workers tried their luck at nearby brickyards or factories, but few trades matched the skill or pride of architectural terracotta. For many, the closure was more than a lost job. It was the end of a craft that had defined their lives and their community. By the end of 1932, the Atlantic Terracotta Company, once the largest of its kind in America, stood idle. The industry that had clothed the Woolworth building in luminous, hand-finished ornament had collapsed, leaving behind shuttered plants and a generation of artisans with nowhere to go. The streets of Perth Amboy, once alive with the shift-change whistle and the bustle of skilled labor, grew quiet. The era of the craftsman's skyscraper was over, replaced by a world where beauty was no longer hand-shaped, but calculated, economized, and, for many, forgotten. In 1932, the Museum of Modern Art staged an exhibition that would rewrite the language of architecture. Curated by Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson, Modern Architecture International exhibition presented a new doctrine for the skyscraper age. Their gallery was stripped of ornament and filled instead with photographs and models of buildings defined by clean lines, flat surfaces, and exposed structure. The accompanying book, The International Style Architecture, since 1922, distilled their philosophy into 3 rules: volume over mass, regularity over symmetry, and, most provocatively, the avoidance of applied decoration. Inside MoMA's archives, curatorial memos reveal a deliberate campaign to sideline the past. Johnson and Hitchcock debated which architects to include, weighing the merits of steel and glass over carved stone. Buildings like the Woolworth, with their Gothic crowns and terracotta skins, were dismissed as romantic relics, out of step with the needs of a modern industrial society. The exhibition's wall text declared that ornament is no longer a natural product of our civilization. The message was clear. To decorate was to look backward and to waste labor and resources on gestures that no longer spoke to the age of the machine. This anti-ornament stance was not new. Adolf Loos, in his 1908 essay, Ornament and Crime, had already condemned decorative facades as a drag on economic and moral progress. But MoMA's show gave these ideas institutional authority, recasting the skyscraper as a vessel for light, space, and efficiency, never for spectacle. In their view, the future belonged to the glass box, not the cathedral. Developers and corporate clients, eager for symbols of rationality and progress, began to echo the language of the exhibition. In boardrooms and planning meetings, the word ornament became shorthand for waste. Johnson himself would later recall that he and his colleagues thought they were sweeping away the debris of history. The international style was no longer just an aesthetic. It was a manifesto, shaping the ambitions of a generation. Architects who once competed to outdo each other in stone and terracotta now measured success in regularity, proportion, and the honest expression of structure. The skyscraper was recast as a tool of commerce, stripped of its old world trappings, ready to serve a new economic order. By 1952, Park Avenue's skyline was changing. Lever House, the new headquarters for Lever Brothers, stood at 390 Park as a glass and steel slab, its green-blue curtain wall hovering above a raised plaza. Designed by Gordon Bunshaft of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, Lever House broke with the masonry towers of the past. The building's continuous glass surface and open-plan offices announced a new era. Inside company archives, executives described the headquarters as a symbol of transparency and efficiency, a physical expression of modern business ideals. The glass box was not just architecture, it was a message. Corporate leaders quickly recognized the power of this new aesthetic. The glass facade, the open interiors, the sense of light and order, these were seen as tools for projecting progress. Internal memos from Lever Brothers called their building a statement of rationality, a break from tradition. The design promised not only a new look, but a new way of working, one that favored clarity and speed over ornament and hierarchy. 6 years later, the Seagram building rose at 375 Park Avenue. It was completed in 1958, and it was the work of Mies van der Rohe and Philip Johnson. 40 stories of bronze-tinted glass and exposed steel set back from the street by a wide plaza, the Seagram building was uncompromising in its regularity. Samuel Bronfman, Seagram's developer, demanded perfection in every detail, but the old flourishes were gone. Trade journals marveled at the building's disciplined grid and called it a model of reason. The New York Times described it as a monument to reason. For corporations, these new skins brought practical benefits. Curtain wall construction meant bigger windows, more daylight, and flexible floor plans. Prefabricated panels kept construction fast and predictable. Maintenance was easier and cheaper than with the ornate stonework of earlier skyscrapers. Boardroom minutes show executives embracing the logic of the assembly line. Architecture became an asset measured by efficiency, speed, and adaptability. The glass box was no longer a monument, it was a machine for business. Facade engineers in New York spend much of their careers quantifying risk in dollars and square feet. For them, the difference between a terracotta skyscraper and a glass curtain wall is not just aesthetic, it is a line item that can stretch over half a century. Local Law 11, the city's periodic facade inspection mandate, has generated decades of repair data. Reports show that a historic terracotta envelope like the Woolworth buildings demands regular hands-on inspection, repointing, and custom replacement of cracked or spalling units. Every cornice, gargoyle, and projecting detail is another potential water leak, a hazard for falling debris, and a specialized repair. According to white papers from leading engineering firms, a full restoration campaign on a terracotta high-rise can range from $10 to $40 million per cycle, with access and labor often dwarfing the cost of the replacement pieces themselves. Maintenance logs from similar early 20th century towers show costs of $5 to $15 per square foot for major campaigns, expenses that recur every few decades, not just once. By contrast, a modern glass curtain wall is engineered for predictability. Prefabricated panels arrive by the truckload and are clipped to the frame with standardized anchors. Routine maintenance focuses on sealant renewal, gasket replacement, and the occasional glass panel swap. Over a 50-year window, the cumulative repair and inspection costs for a typical glass curtain wall are a fraction of those for a terracotta facade. Some facade engineers estimate that, on a per-square-foot basis, maintaining a highly ornamented masonry envelope can cost several times more, sometimes approaching 10 times as much, than a flat, unitized glass wall over the same period. The numbers are not just theoretical. Insurance underwriters and property managers now factor these multipliers into reserve requirements and risk assessments. For a developer or building owner, the math is unavoidable. Every extra cornice or sculpted spandrel is a future liability, not just a design flourish. Charts from facade consultants make the incentive plain. Over 50 years, the owner of a glass-walled office tower might spend $2 to $3 per square foot per major maintenance cycle, while a terracotta tower could face $15 or more. The gap only widens with age and exposure. In the language of engineers, ornament translates directly into operating expense. For the market, that means beauty has to justify itself against a rising tide of maintenance bills and regulatory scrutiny. The logic is simple. In a world governed by spreadsheets and risk models, the incentive tilts away from craft and toward the clean, sealed surface. A new breed of skyscraper has risen along the southern edge of Central Park, towers engineered less as homes than as vaults. On Billionaires Row, the logic of the market is visible in every darkened window. In buildings like 432 Park Avenue and 220 Central Park South, more than half the units show little sign of life year-round. Deed records from the city's ACRIS system reveal a dense web of LLC entities and offshore trusts, each holding a piece of the sky. Journalists and researchers have traced ownership from Delaware to the British Virgin Islands, and utility data confirms what the night skyline suggests. Many apartments remain unlit for weeks or months at a time. Developers understand exactly what their buyers want. Marketing decks for 111 West 57th Street and its neighbors boast of ceiling heights that stretch to 14 or even 15 feet, an amenity that commands a premium measured in millions. Sales records show that in these towers, price per square foot climbs sharply with every extra foot of vertical space. The value is in volume, not ornament. Brokers pitch the sensation of a double-height living room, the sweep of park views, the privacy of a full-floor residence. Few buyers ask about exterior flourishes. A hand-carved gargoyle adds nothing to the resale value. What moves the market is the promise of exclusivity and security. For many owners, these apartments function as safe deposit boxes, assets to be held, not lived in. The numbers are stark. In some towers, over 60% of units are not primary residences. The buildings themselves are designed for this reality. Floor plans minimize the number of units per level, maximizing privacy and view. Amenities rival five-star hotels, but the lobbies remain quiet. The city's most expensive real estate is often the most underused. This is the architecture of capital storage, not community. Where Woolworth built to be seen and remembered, today's supertalls are engineered to warehouse wealth. Their value measured in square feet of air and inches of glass, not in the stories they tell or the lives they shelter. Today's towers are engineered to maximize assets, not awe. With over 60% of some luxury units sitting empty and glass facades replacing stone, the skyline becomes a ledger, not a legacy. As cities trade artistry for efficiency, what we build now shapes how we remember ourselves. The real monument isn't just steel or glass, it's what we choose to value. If you believe architecture should outlast trends, let's keep the conversation going in the comments.